Hi, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian, and today I will be talking about my most disappointed and worst books of 2023. So the obligatory thing, basically saying that if you loved any of these books, if you really enjoyed these books and you find it offensive that I am talking bad or critiquing these books, please find yourself another channel to watch. Basically, if you love them, great. I'm glad someone did. I did not. They did not work for me. Whether it's because of my experience, how I grew up, or because I'm different than you, I didn't enjoy them. They didn't work for me. So if you enjoy these, good. If you can watch this without being personally offended that I am critiquing one of your favorite books, let's keep going. First, I'm going to talk about my DNFs. These are like the hard DNFs. I am not picking these back up throughout the year. I put them down. I feel like they were a waste of my time, and more often than not, it was because I couldn't get into them and didn't want to waste my time on them anymore. They are in no particular order because I can't get them in a particular order in Goodreads. So, the first is The Last House on Needless Street by Katrina Ward. I'm not going to go over all of these, but basically I got to the point where the girl moved in next door to who she thought stole her sister, and that's all I really cared to know about. I don't know if it was just making my anxiety go nuts or what, but ultimately I just didn't want to finish it. I didn't want it anymore. I didn't want to continue with it, so I did not. My Roommate is a Vampire by Jenna Levine. I had been looking forward to this because I want to get into more fantasy romance. Not to say romantasy, because I feel like that's leaning towards like the heavy fantasy section. And I'm thinking more urban fantasy, if that makes sense. So I kind of had high hopes for this one. However, the characters in here I just did not connect with. I thought overall that it was a very judgy book. The main character right off the bat was judging the vampire's name and going, what kind of name is that? But also judging her best friend despite them trying to help her. And then the vampire judging Claire, I think that's her name, by her name. Like, that's a feminine name, right? Obviously it's a woman. And it's like, feels very judgy and doesn't feel like it's appropriate for this day and age, the way you're all being judgy about it. I really just didn't care. Also, it seemed like immediate sexual attraction, which is fine, I guess, but I think there's a subtler way of doing it, and that wasn't it. Next is How Can I Help You by Laura Sims. I thought this one would also be fun because it's about a nurse who killed her patients, and to escape the scrutiny of like people kind of like getting tuned into it, she leaves and becomes a librarian under a different name. No one knows her past, but then when they hire a new librarian, this librarian gets suspicious of the old nurse librarian, particularly when a particular annoying patron turns up dead in the library bathroom. I thought this would be relatively funny. There were some things that like I connected with vaguely, just because I work in an academic library, which is slightly different than a public library, but also it just became a chore to read. I think it was going too slowly, and I really just didn't care for the alternate perspectives that we kept getting. So neither one of them were interesting enough for me to pick up. Next is Cackle by Rachel Harrison. This was one of Jan's from Jan Agaton's book club picks for the Full Moon Book Club. Ultimately picked it up because I thought it would be interesting. Ultimately put it down because I don't understand why the main character was still following this witch around like a puppy dog, even though like some pretty shady shit happened. So that was uncomfortable. I just didn't want to go on with it. Whisper Down the Lane by Clay McLeod Chapman. This was a Literally Dead book club pick that I didn't get into. Basically I made it to where the cat died and he made the decision not to tell his wife. That pissed me off. So I was done with that book. There was no good thing to come from lying about a pet dying in a gruesome way to your spouse. No. It's really good actually by Monica Hesse. This one about a recent divorce woman trying to figure out herself and what to do with herself after said divorce. I think it was trying to be funny. I didn't understand it, didn't get its humor. I didn't think it was funny. It felt like it was trying to be a more modern Bridget Jones's Diary, and it wasn't working for me whatsoever. The Writing Retreat by Julia Bartz, another Literally Dead book club pick. I did not like it. I felt there was a small moment when everyone who was invited to this writing retreat was in a room and they decided to have their diversity talk right then and there and move on with it. I'm a lesbian. I'm black. Let's talk about slavery. Well, that made everyone uncomfortable. Okay, let's move on. That's our diversity quota for the book. I really just didn't care. I wasn't connecting with anybody, and I felt like the whole time the main character was just whiny. Buzz, When Nature Breaks the Law by Rachel Roach, or Mary Roach, sorry. Yeah, this was Mary Roach's final straw for me. Mary Roach was highly suggested after reading a lot of Caitlin Doughty's work of just like, oh, you want to read more about dead bodies? Read Stiff by Mary Roach. I didn't like Stiff. I felt that Mary Roach's interjections that everyone felt was kind of quippy and like funny, because it came from Mary Roach, was ultimately like, it took me out of the story. It did not do anything for the nonfiction she was writing. I thought it showed her biases. And then I read Packing for Mars, which also showed some of her biases and more of her little inserts that was really just kind of like crassly put in my opinion. Like, Mary Roach, what is classic astronaut handsome? Explain that to me. Is there a classically handsome astronaut type? Like, I don't understand. Like, I spent more minutes than I should have basically pondering just that statement alone when trying to read that book, and just like kept going back to it going, what does that even mean? And she had a bunch like that, and everyone keeps thinking she's funny, and she's not. So when I tried, so both of those were through audiobooks, so I tried physically reading Buzz, thinking, all right, let's try this, but got like probably a couple chapters in, and there was a particular scene where Mary Roach was sitting down with a couple of lieutenants from Tahoe talking about the bear-human conflict. These guys took time out of their day to talk to Mary Roach, and she had the gall to ignore their conversation and eavesdrop into a conversation of two girls sitting next to her talking about Taylor Swift that she apparently found more interesting. How fucking rude. That was I was done. Done with Mary Roach. Never again. Funeral Girl by Emma Oland. This one, I just couldn't care about the main character who made everything, including someone else's death, about herself. The Whispering Dark, another Full Moon book club pick from Jan Agaton. This is by Kelly Andrew. I also didn't care about this. I thought it was overly complex in some areas and overly simplified in others, and really just couldn't connect with the characters. And then finally, Monkey Beach by Eden Robinson. This was one of my 23 of 2023, and I had heard good things about it, but unfortunately could not get into it. It became a problem for me when there was flashbacks within flashbacks, that when we got back to the current day, went back to one of the flashbacks and we're supposed to understand where we left off. And it could have been from the original flashback or the second or third flashback in that flashback. Not entirely sure. Ultimately, didn't care. Didn't want to move on. So, that's got DNF'd. Next, we have my disappointing books. These are in no particular order. I guess like they're just kind of gonna go in order in the time that I read them throughout the year. First, I have 10 disappointing books and then 5 worst books. So, first disappointing book is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. This one, we are following 2 women. One's a marine biologist? I think so, who ends up going on an expedition under the ocean that's only supposed to be a couple of weeks. 6 months go by, no contact. We follow her wife as she is trying to cope with the fact that she's not getting information from the company, that she has heard nothing about her wife, so we kind of see her grieve for her wife, and then her wife comes back, but she's different. So she's grieving for her wife, their relationship, what they had, who she was, as she's still living and she's changing now. I didn't mind this. There were some couple uncomfortable moments in terms of like claustrophobic stillness when we were in the marine biologist perspective, stuck under the ocean with nothing but like an occasional clank on the submarine. That was driving me nuts. But other than that, I didn't necessarily connect with the wife's perspective. I understand what they were trying to do, and I understand how folks really enjoyed this book. I personally couldn't connect with it. So I gave it 3 stars. I felt like I was missing something. Ultimately, 3 stars is still like a relatively okay rating. In my opinion, it's still an okay. It was okay. I did donate this book as soon as I was done with it, though. The next, House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson. We are following a girl who lives in the slums, and she wants a better life for herself. So when she applies to be a blood maid for a very prestigious society of vampires, she kind of jumps at the chance despite her best friend, her brother, being against it. She goes ahead and does it. She is a blood maid for this particular socialite of a vampire, this woman who she then becomes enamored with, and she starts to understand the hierarchy among the blood maids and among the socialites, and come to find out that her vampiric mistress of sorts is there's more to her than she understood. I know that this is fantasy. I know that a lot of people like Alexis Henderson's writing. However, I felt like this one in particular, despite having a pretty detailed, I feel like she had really good detail in terms of the castle or the mansion or whatever that they were in, but not so much the outside. I don't know, there was just some things that I'm like, oh, this is really cool details, and other things I'm like, this is really lackluster, or this in particular is like, I'm having a hard time to suspend my disbelief. Like, it felt like the main character took too long to figure out what was going on, and I don't know, maybe I just didn't connect with it. I don't know. I didn't like it. Tuesday Mooney Talks to Ghosts by Kate Reculia. This was one that I think I ended up trading a book for this one. A friend ended up giving it to me and was really excited about it because I liked the premise. We were essentially following this main young woman, very Wednesday Addams inspired character, who is really enticed by this scavenger hunt. The scavenger hunt that was essentially basically an eccentric billionaire dies. He comes up with a scavenger hunt before he dies and has it put into place after he dies, that whoever ends up winning the scavenger hunt gets his part of his wealth of sorts, something like that. I like the premise of this, but I felt like the main character, this Wednesday Addams inspired character, was very flat. In fact, most of the characters were pretty flat, aside from the neighbor girl who looked up to Wednesday Addams. Even though I don't know why, because the Wednesday Addams type character like kind of treated the little girl like shit for a lot of the book. So I don't know, it was not as well thought out as I would have hoped, or didn't have as much depth to it. Next one is Big Swiss by Jen Began. Everyone thinks this is hilarious. The first like 5 to 10 minutes of it was, we are following this woman who is a transcriber for a therapist who basically is having her transcribe his sessions. Some of the sessions she talks about is really funny and incredibly awkward in like this incredibly like uncomfortable and awkward way. I thought that was particularly funny, but as she's transcribing these sessions, one of the patients she nicknames Big Swiss. She doesn't know their real names at all, but then when she happens to be at a dog park, she recognizes Big Swiss's voice and becomes enamored with this woman, and like to the point of like lying to her to befriend her and falling into her bed. After that initial 10 minutes of the book, everything else was really just uncomfortable for me. It goes over like several different types of topics which I think could have been done better, but were done in this like blasé way of just, and I don't know how to, I didn't like the feeling that came from it, and ultimately just found it very lackluster. So next is Ghost Radio by Leopoldo Gout. This one was weird, and I don't think it's what I was expecting. Basically, we are following this young man, his wife or fiance, and their best friend as they make this radio show basically talking up to others about their ghost experiences or their experiences with the paranormal, only for their radio waves to transcend the current time and place. And it gets real weird. I don't even know how to explain it. It's not what I was expecting. It's not really what I was wanting. And yeah, it's I can say that it's a me problem. Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's a me problem. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. Mostly, I thought this was marketed wrong. Historical fiction. We are following these two characters, this young woman and then this man who want to be together but ultimately can't be because of their status. He's in a lower class than she is. And basically, one night when they snuck out, something attacks her. He thinks she's dead, so he leaves. And we see him go through that grief and how it's changed him. She actually lives and thinks he abandoned her. And basically they meet back up because her ranchero needs help with defending themselves against Americans, as well as something sinister that is around them that ultimately attacked her. I enjoyed the vampire aspect of this book. I did not enjoy the second chance romance of this aspect of this book, and because ultimately it was a historical second chance romance with some vampire horror plots thrown in, and I would have rather had more of those than the characters trying to figure themselves out, because it felt like the main young lady took way too long to get over her stubbornness and get over her pride. As well as I didn't quite understand. I felt like the conflict between her and her dad was overdone. I thought there was expecting some kind of pushback or that bit to come to a head, and it never did. So, or it did and like failed, and then like I thought it was going to come to a head again, and there was nothing. So it was just really kind of disappointing to me, but I am still interested in Isabel Cañas' work. The same with Alexis Henderson. Next, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. This was a read. I hadn't read it since I was in middle school or high school, not even elementary school, and it didn't quite hold up. It was kind of boring in all honesty. So. And then Gallant by V.E. Schwab. I'm just realizing that, this is something that's been like pondering in my mind for a while, that V.E. Schwab's work, interesting premises, not so much in terms of execution. Gallant in and of itself was very flat, and we are following this young girl who's mute, who is living in a boarding house. She's becoming of age, and suddenly they get a letter from her uncle saying that they will claim her. She goes there only to realize that her uncle has been dead for a while, and her cousin, his son, doesn't want her living in the house because ultimately there's something about the house or about the garden wall that he's trying to protect her from. Again, another one that I thought was like overly complicated in some areas and overly simplistic in others, and ultimately was kind of a letdown. And then finally, my last disappointment was the And then into my most disappointed books of the year. These are in no particular order other than when I read them. The first is The X-Hacks by Erin Sterling. Holy crap. I did not like this book whatsoever. I ended up listening to this I was trying to get more cozy witchy vibes in, and this was not it. For some reason I have it in my thing as a standalone. It is not, and I am not continuing on with the series, but we are following, I already forgot their names. We are following this young woman who basically had dated this young man, but because he was betrothed to someone else, basically broke her heart, and in a fit of heartbreak she ends up like cursing him, but she doesn't think she actually curses him because she uses like a Bed Bath & Beyond candle and she's drunk and like it shouldn't count. Only it did count. And so years go by and he comes back to town. He's no longer betrothed, but he comes back to town to help continue the ley line for the magic. That's like everyone is aware. Is everyone aware that magic happens, or is it just specifically these people? I don't think so. But basically he comes back to like recharge the ley lines and realizes that there's been a curse put upon him. The young woman feels bad and goes to try to help, only for a second chance romance to come out of it, and sexy times ensue to the point where it was really ridiculous in terms of polka dots and knees now turn this guy on. It very much has like Halloween Town vibes, and ultimately it was more about the sex than it was about the plot, and I didn't care. I thought it was ridiculous. This is not what I wanted. So I really just didn't like it at all. Next is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. I think I originally gave this a 3.4, but after like thinking about it more, I moved it down to a 2. I think I did a whole review on this, so you can, and I'm sure you can guess why. I did not read Iron Flame. I actually just kind of waited for everybody else to figure out what was going on and saw what was going on. I was like, I'm good, thanks though. Yeah, I liked the premise of this, and I hate that the plot was actually interesting, even though like we get the plot for about 5 minutes and then we completely veer off into this love situation, which was written younger than it needed to be. It was overly dramatic and it was so much sex that we hardly get any world building. We hardly get anything from the dragons. We don't learn about the dragons at all. Everyone was flat as all fuck, and then at the very end it's like a jaw-dropping cliffhanger. But I've heard reviews of Iron Flame and I don't care, so I'm not going on with this. Yeah, I'm not gonna even bother with the synopsis. That basically explained it enough for me already, so there's that. Next is The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood. I was prepared for some of the critiques of this book. I was told that Ali Hazelwood has a specific type. They have to be big, they have to be big-shouldered, it has to be a big man. I get that. The Love Hypothesis was a Rey Kylo Ren fanfic of sorts. I was prepared for that. What I was not prepared for was the constant lying in this book. I hated it. This main character, basically she is a PhD candidate. She's trying to make sure that her best friend gets with her ex, but her best friend doesn't want to do it because she still feels like she has a hang up on her ex. So to prove that she's wrong, she randomly kisses the first guy that comes across her, who happens to be the known asshole and also a professor. So they decide that this is mutually beneficial. He needs a reason for the board to believe that he's gonna stay and that he's not a flight risk, so he can get more funding. She wants her best friend and her ex to get together, so they pretend to fake date. She is constantly lying, and constantly saying this is not who she is, she's not like this, but we see no evidence of the contrary. She is constantly just lying out her teeth. There is some good conversation around women in the STEM field and BIPOC women, particularly in the STEM field, as well as the misogynistic way that a lot of white men treat women and BIPOC women in the STEM field. That didn't make up for the rest of this. That didn't make up for anything else. I'm hesitant to go on with more Ali Hazelwood, but I will try. But ultimately, I did not like this one whatsoever. 0 Days by Ruth Ware. This was probably the worst one to start with a Ruth Ware. I have not read a Ruth Ware before. I don't think this was the best one. I feel like basically we are following this couple. Well, we're following the woman, the wife in this couple. He is a hacker, and a computer hacker that tests security systems. She also helps test the security systems, but more in a physical way of breaking into the building to see where the weaknesses are. One night when she's testing it out, she ends up getting arrested and has to explain like what she's doing, that the company hired her, only for her to return home to find that her husband is dead. She feels like she's the one being put on blame for her husband's death because she can't remember certain time lapse, because she was at the police station for so long and her phone happened to be off. But I would have to agree that with the rest of the reviews of this book, that it seemed like she just kind of came up with these out of thin air ideas about what was happening, and they would be correct, and she would like call the person she would need, and that's the person who she would need to go to. But ultimately it was a lot of like saying, not doing, but the thing that she was doing was very meandering. It was entertaining enough, but it does make me question the rest of Ruth Ware's work. I just don't think that was the best one to start out with. Next is Hunter's Moon by Annabelle Chase and Tana Gray. This is the third book in the Hex Support Mystery series. I have a full review of those series, but basically we are following three witches. This is the third book in the series, so we are following the third child, the youngest child. I already forgot her name. And it kind of just goes downhill. So like Pink Moon was fantastic. There was some critique I had on it. Could have used a little more romance rather than just the hints of it that all the books tend to have. It just could have been more. Second book, I had issues with them constantly pointing out how much food she was eating, how much weight she was gaining, how many calories she was consuming. It was just annoying. All the books had issues with pop culture references, whether it was older pop culture references to dig at the fact of how old the main character was, or newer pop culture references to point out the fact that how young the character was. That's particularly what happened with Hunter's Moon, with our youngest witch, that constantly talking about TikTok or eating or TikTok or some kind of pop cultural references, and they were constantly eating. Like, I felt like the first two books were perfectly fine in the amount they were eating, but now in the third one it was just like constantly like they were eating in every scene. I also just didn't like their familiar. I think it was a Chihuahua, and it was just like I didn't understand. It also didn't understand the beautiful covers of these books not matching with the storyline of the books whatsoever. It was also at a carnival, which I don't tend to enjoy. There's just so many things wrong with it. I was so disappointed in this. I almost DNF'd it. Yeah. And then speaking of one that I should have DNF'd, I've talked about this in my recent wrap up, was Weird is Beautiful by Liz Marvin. This one, I think it was just ultimately the reason why this is my last one, and the reason I'm most mad about this is because I was so excited for it. I had seen it in a Oregon bookshop back in February. I didn't get it at the time, but took a picture and had been eagerly awaiting until I could purchase it from bookshop.org, and finally got it and was still really excited to read it. It's a gorgeous cover, and basically it's supposed to be like fun facts about octopuses mixed with some kind of self-helpy quotes. And yes, it's like that, but it's hard to decipher if this is a self-help book for kids, which is doubtful because there is some cussing in here, and some complex ideas. But is it for adults? No, it doesn't quite feel like it, because there's a weird tonality about this in terms of being too juvenile or too simple, or the self-help facts being really shallow and not very in-depth whatsoever. It also just kind of felt like the tonality with Liz Marvin speaking for octopuses, to the point of saying that octopuses are annoyed when we call their tentacles, that they're arms, and that we really should get it right. But being very blasé about, oh, well, octopus is actually a Greek word, so it would be octopuses, but octopi is fine too. As well as just the amount of puns that they thought were funny, in terms of like I Capture the Cuttlefish by Donnie Smith, Harry Sea Otter in the Deathly Shallows by J.K. Rowling, To Kill a Moray Eel by Harper Lee. Like, it doesn't, I don't like it. Honestly, like, this took me 5 days to read. It's really not that long of a book at all, with like really not that much on each page. Like, that's probably one of the most filled pages. I hate it. I hate it so much. I gave it 1.5 stars for the art alone. Not to mention some of the accessibility issues when it comes to the art. There were some issues that I was having just reading this in a slightly darker setting than I am in now. And some of the, like, this isn't necessarily a good example, but like with the gradient and having the black text within the darker color. I was just overall frustrated with this book. It was a chore to read. I finished it because I kept thinking it was going to get better, and it ultimately didn't. And some of the self-help things were just really lackluster and just really poor attempts at self-help, in my opinion. So yeah, this gets to be the worst book of 2023 because I'm so mad at it, because I was so excited. So those are the books that I have for my most disappointed and the worst books of 2023. What were some of your worst books of 2023? Please let me know it down in the comments down below. I'd love to know. Otherwise, if you made it this far, thank you so much for your support. Thanks for watching. And let's go ahead and put a thumbs down emoji. Otherwise, I hope that you're all doing well, and I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I'll see you in another video very soon. Chew.